Welcome to Just a Chat. Today's webinar on AI retooling of public services worldwide, not just in the US. Is this thoughtless? Is it being done with some objectives? Is it lacking empathy? Is the end result a lack of empathy in the practice of public services? The rapidly accelerating deployment of artificial intelligence across the public sector has been getting a lot of media attention since Elon Musk's DOGE initiative in the United States really started rolling. And for those that have followed it, this is not unique to the United States. It's underway in Europe. It's certainly well underway in China. It's well underway in Canada as well. And as was indicated in last week's editorial or article, each country is taking a somewhat different approach. What's getting more attention now is the impact on government employees amid fears that the government will function less well and not more effectively as a result. As AI systems are rapidly rolling out, a picture begins to emerge of opportunity, but also of anxiety and potential unintended consequences that could reshape the very nature of public services. So this is a topic I think of interest to all of us, whether we've worked in the public sector or are in receipt of public services. We've got the issues of the pace of change, how well this is being managed, or whether or not it's just flippant and ad hoc. We've got the issues of global competition as each nation seems to be taking on the usage of this tool, this newfound tool, and using it in the interests of increasing efficiency, reducing costs, and maybe even increasing effectiveness. So Jeff, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I just, Barry, wanted to just make a few comments about the article, and first of all and foremost, give credit where credit is due, that article was based on an article that you handed off to me and asked if I would run with it, and I accepted that challenge. It also coincided with an article that Perry sent me from The Atlantic about the DOGE efforts and what was going on, or what seemed to be going on behind the scenes. And so I took that as a starting point, and I started to look into what was going on with not only the US government and DOGE, but also some other governments around the world, and as they're implementing AI. And it was obvious, I think, that the US and China are leading that charge. They're pursuing it almost as a matter of existential import. And then European member nations, Canada, the UK, are following along, but not nearly as aggressively. And it also coincided with me getting a report from the Better Works people, the State of Performance Enablement, which highlighted, it was based on a survey of over 2,000 leaders and individual contributors across many, many organizations. And that highlighted a real divide between the leaders in organizations and how they're implementing and using AI tools as compared to the individual contributors or the frontline workers. And there was a real disconnect that came out in those numbers. And then just today, I got another article from Axios, which further highlights that divide. And I can share more about that if anyone is interested. And so the summary of all of this basically, the other thing I wanted to mention is that the other thing that Perry mentioned last week in the webinar about waste and excess was he made a comment about, is AI going to be like Ozempic for public sector organizations? And it kind of rocked me back on my heels a little bit. And I thought about it some more. And I thought, that's actually a really interesting analogy. And I fleshed that out a little bit in the article. And I think it was Sonia at the meeting last week who also highlighted some of the side effects of Ozempic. And of course, you have to think about the side effects of deploying AI in the public sector as well. And I thought that was a worthwhile little thought experiment. Anyways, the newsletter went out, and then there was a rather lively conversation that ensued. Charlie and Perry and Mel and Jalant and Bob Jones all weighed in, and we got into a rather wide-ranging conversation, one that I didn't expect, actually. But it was really fascinating, and it was about the role of government and the size of government and how to make change happen. And there was a lot of perspectives, some favoring a much more rapid sledgehammer approach, and others, talking about a more measured approach. And I was probably on that side of the equation. Some favored a much, much smaller government. And it reminded me of Grover Norquist, a guy in the States years ago, a Republican commentator whose ambition was to make government so small that it could be drowned in a bathtub. I don't know if anybody remembers, that was his example. And Bill Jones surprised me just the other day with a important philosophical dimension to the discussion. And he questioned whether we should even want government to be more efficient and effective. And I thought that was a really interesting wrinkle to throw at us, because frankly, that wasn't something that I had on my bingo card. But it was really interesting. And Bill expressed some concern about the implementation. He wasn't concerned about the implementation pace, but he was more concerned about government scope and power itself. And he expressed some skepticism about AI-enhanced government and worried that it could create a terror weapon on the citizens, and something that this has been conveyed in terms of China's approach, right? The CCP and their social credit system. You could see that being deployed in Western countries as well for similar purposes. And Bill suggested that maybe AI would help with specific administrative functions like registries or government motor registries or things like that. But it's more about minimizing government's role and influence overall. And that was a really, I think, important and critical counterpoint to our discussion, that it could enable more effective control rather than better service delivery. And that's something I hadn't adequately considered. And as I mentioned, I'm the outlier here. I believe that government has a role to play, and I want it to be as small as possible and as effective and as efficient as possible in administering the affairs of state. And when Joelant chimed in and said minimum government, maximum governance, and that resonated with me. And I'm on the side of the equation that says a more measured approach is warranted. I want government to be smaller and more effective, and I think AI will be a big part of that and how that happens. And I think leadership is important, and the change in big complex organizations, as Charlie mentioned, and as I've recounted from my experience, it's really hard. And I think important in all of that is empathy. And I closed the article with a comment about a quote from Elon Musk saying, that was the central weakness of Western civilization, is empathy. And I don't agree with that. So that was just my take. And there was lots of other voices in the discussion that ensued after the article. So I'll leave it to you, Perry, to moderate the conversation, and I'll contribute where I can.
I'm going to call on Peter, but beforehand, I'm going to make reference to the lead-in that I had in the article, which was that change is necessary but rarely popular. And if you are facing a crisis, empathy is probably the last thing you want to take into consideration. And one of the rationales for the pace of change and the way, in fact, it's being done is a belief that the United States government is facing a critical $2 trillion a year deficit. And that is cause for alarm and therefore cause for less empathy, and why DOGE and Elon have been brought on. But there are some other points I'll make along the way. So Peter, you're on. Comment you want to make.
Thank you, Perry, and also for your opening remarks, Jeff. I just wanted to say at the beginning of this conversation, as you probably all know, the federal government of Canada just announced last week regulations, or at least guidelines for AI in the public service. This is one of the first countries, if not the first country, to do so. And I just wanted to say Canada's been first in a number of things related to getting AI going. We don't seem to have the sustainability or the carrying capacity to carry it through. So although we made this proclamation about AI and governance, or government in particular, we'll see how that is actually implemented. Same as we were the first to have an AI strategy. We beat Singapore by 6 months. But, I think that's not a race that we should be in. We should be in a race of doing things the right way, as opposed to just being first. So I just want to point out that, this latest development in Canada, which I admire, I think it's a good step. but whether we can actually execute it is an issue I'm concerned about. Thank you.
Well, I listened to Hard Talk, BBC, and some of the questions that were being asked of Reid Hoffman, who I think was the founder of LinkedIn, about AI, was mistakes and whether or not we're moving too fast. And he made a very interesting observation. He said, speed is not the issue. The issue is how quickly you can fix your mistakes. And as you know, I'm of a belief that in order to affect change, maybe ready, fire, aim makes a lot of sense. There's some logic to that. One might say it's an emotional reaction, but not really. There's logic to ready, fire, aim because you get feedback and know what to do in response. And I think in some ways, that's the model that Elon is trying to exercise. They may say the judges are getting in the way, and there's a lot of impediments and unions and public reaction. But if he's ready, fire, aim, and he can adapt as he makes errors, and that is rehire when mistakes are made, et cetera, there's going to be human consequences. And one might say there's a lack of empathy. But you've got to balance the need for empathy with whether or not you're in a serious crisis, and whether empathy is being illustrated in the way people who are being let go are given their severances and given notices and given help in finding other employment. Anyway, it clearly is an example of change, rapid change, the relationship of logic to emotion. Another point that's come up in discussion just today. Bill brought to my attention the usage of AI in a public service called the courts. Now, you would think AI as a replacement for judges. It's one thing to use AI as a replacement for lawyers who need to litigate and find previous court actions and bring that evidence to the table as it relates to law, and that the judge, being blind, listens to all parties in order to make a decision. But as human beings, judges being human beings, there may be emotional elements, there may be biases, there may be anger with the leader, there may be irritation that you got a lawyer who you're uncomfortable with. Apparently some research is being done about how objective AI is in making a decision in the courts. Bill, if you're with us, can you elaborate on what it is that article had to say?
Certainly. The essence of the article was a previous study back in 2015 measured the judges' emotional application into their judgments and found that they often utilized their decisions not based on precedent or law, but their emotional feelings. And when tested with ChatGPT almost exclusively according to the article, utilized precedents and the specifics of law directly, and were not swayed by heart-pulling arguments. And so the argument was that perhaps utilizing AI as a resource for the judiciary to make their decisions might be applicable, with the worry, however, as the article pointed out, that would this turn into a minority report where AI would overrule judges, given that circumstances do measure in court rulings, and that, circumstances, as the article presented, someone racing with their pregnant wife to a hospital gets a speeding ticket. AI would give them the ticket, whereas the officer would likely help them get to the hospital. Those type of decisions are a risk within AI. His conclusion, however, is that AI will probably migrate into the legal system in one way or another, and that we, as a people and citizens, need to take very careful view of that as we move forward.
I think that's the point that Peter was making. Feeling comfortable, it may be Canada is one of the few countries that is attempting to put a regulatory framework around the adoption of AI, so that in fact it does address efficiency, effectiveness, and economy, but in an empathetic way. Peter, you've got your hand up? You're muted.
I was just going to add to the comment just made that I was involved some years ago, the same kind of transition in law. I was involved some years ago in introducing basically desktop computing to law firms, and in particular Toronto law firms. And many of the partners were quite concerned about having individual lawyers operating their own computers when everything had been in a sort of a central system before that. So I recommended they use it for discovery as a way to start developing an ability to use the computer in an effective way. And sure enough, that added to their efficiencies. And of course, over a decade or so, they all got using computers as tools to help them. No AI involved in that, but it was databases and data sets of various sorts. Of course, obviously, rules of law. And I think that we'll see a lot of that kind of thing happen now with AI agents that can help in assisting a lawyer or a judge, for that matter, in going through things. But also, I was going to say on the judge and machine basis, we have, of course, sports events, and sometimes a referee might make a wrong call, and the audience notices it. So there's a big row from the voice of the people. But in fact, they also now, certainly in hockey, a fast-moving sport, they also now, if there's a controversy over the judgment call, they have, of course, a video recording of it. So they now defer to a machine over the judge, who is the referee. So I don't know whether we'll get to that in the court system, but let's keep that in mind. We're starting to see that happen in sports, for example.
Well, there are other sports. You've seen it in tennis. You've seen it in,
Yes, other sports too.
and you're
Yeah.
seeing it in baseball. And so sports seems to be leading the way as people get more anxious about an error being made in a sport than an error being made by the public service sector. So I suspect you're seeing leading edge, and you see the anxiety of replacing umpires, the anxiety of replacing the line judges in tennis. But IBM has made a profit of it, and one might say it has made the game more objective and less subjective by taking the people element out of the equation. And that's exactly what we're talking about in the rendering of public services, where those services may be routine. I mean, think about government saying, look, all we need is some basic information. We can do your taxes for you. That's being discussed. So, Jeff, you've got your hand up?
Yeah,
Still?
I was just gonna say on the point about AI being deployed in the legal realm. I don't know if anyone here has heard about the company called Harvey. I think it's a spin-off or an offshoot of one of the big four consulting firms, maybe PwC. But it is an AI first legal platform, and they're deploying it, and they will eventually go public. They are incredibly successful already. But when you think about the volume of legal documentation that exists in digital form in countless law firms, they are have custom built or purpose built large language models that are tuned for that environment. And they're helping law firms to deploy AI for exactly that purpose. And so I think it's only a matter of time that we will see that much, much more integrated into legal practice. And I suspect it's probably already being employed in some other avenues, perhaps by judges or perhaps by clerks in courts, if they have access to a model that is private and can't be used for training purposes. To me, it's certainly a time saver. And when you're considering drafting a contract and you already have, 10,000 samples of that type of contract, you can very, very rapidly, you can really amazingly streamline the development of a contract that then needs to be reviewed by a human. But they don't need to do the grunt work involved with drafting that from scratch. So I think that's inevitable. And I think the bias, some people would be concerned about bias that's inherent in some of these large language models. And that's been a reflection of the training data that's been used. So that's a reality. And then depending on the volume of information, they're not perfect at extracting what's called needles in the haystack. When they have a huge document and they, ask the LLM to access some obscure piece of information that's been inserted in there, they're not perfect at pulling it out. So it's not that they can't miss stuff, but in terms of, time saver for some of the drudgery that is involved with creating documents like that or synthesizing information, I think there's lots of application, and they're going to get better and better, especially with the reasoning models that are now on the scene.
Well, it's not surprising that the law profession would emerge in the discussion of displacing or transforming the public services, and that government is really the source of law. And many politicians actually come out of that profession. What's also fascinating is the legal profession has been the last to give up paper. For any of you that have worked with law firms, and the anxiety they have of giving up paper in the interest of digitizing, and the belief that something in a digital form doesn't have the legitimacy of something in a paper format, gives you some indication of how slow that industry or that profession has been to adopt. So they're having a heck of a time, from the entire legal system, from courts to lawyers, to the judges themselves, to the government. AI is either an aid or an alternative. And therein lies one of the biggest issues that they've got is IBM made a living at saying AI would be an aid, not an alternative, in order to reduce the threat and in order to keep the market open. But as Elon is indicating, it may in fact be an alternative to many in the public service, where human beings performing routine acts in the public service, having jobs, contributing to the economy, may well be gone because they're also contributing to debt. And the value of the two, debt's no longer acceptable, at least to the scale it once was. Peter, you've got your hand up?
Yes, thank you. I was just going to add that I've been working with a major Canadian telecommunications company, one from Western Canada, and their legal department is embracing AI in a very measured way. It's come down from the CIO's office, so it's a program that is evolving across the corporation. But the legal department, as you can appreciate, is lawyers, but also deals a lot with regulation. It's a highly regulated industry, and various jurisdictions involved since they operate nationally. So they are building, and I'm quite impressed with their approach, basically an ability to use AI tools, say an agent, that can be specialized in a certain regulatory environment that they can then use to improve their efficiencies and effectiveness and make even maybe new arguments in their various cases when they go before the regulators. So just a comment to say that it's actually happening in a commercial corporation, and it's the legal department of that commercial corporation. It's not a law firm that is actually embracing AI.
But the tone of this discussion and the tone of former discussions over many of these webinars is that it's coming. We don't spend a lot of time resisting and arguing about misinformation and this and that. We seem to accept the fact that this is coming, and it's coming very fast. There are going to be errors, and hopefully both government and the industries itself will address those errors quickly so that we don't have a reaction. We don't have a Luddite effect. And it doesn't appear to me, at least as an observer, that resistance is having a lot of impact on the emergence of AI in the public services, even though hundreds of thousands are being laid off. Mel?
I just want to say that Bill and Jeff and excuse me, and Peter have made some excellent comments there with respect to the litigation issues. But you well remember about a year or so ago, there was an actual court case in Houston where one of the legal counsel had done some research and found that in his presentation to the court, one of the examples that he cited was a precedent case where the judge presiding over that particular case was the same one referred to in the AI report. And the judge was not in that case that the AI reported on. So AI has come a long way right now, but I think, as Jeff particularly, we've exchanged a lot of emails back and forth. I still think that we still need to put a little bit of a pinch of salt on that stuff with critical thinking to be sure that we don't rely on everything that comes out of that machine. There used to be an old saying that, oh, it's printed on it by a computer, so it's got to be right. That ain't so.
Well, in a way, that's the point I was making, but it seems to me, yes, critical thinking is necessary, but it does not appear to be right now impeding this evolution. And partially because the US, the UK, Canada, EU, China, there's a rush underway. It's competitive, bringing down the cost of government, increasing efficiency and effectiveness, whether it be in defense or in the rendering of welfare. Government has played a major role in every human being's life in every one of these countries, and AI is going to be affecting their lives and the performance of government. So there's a competition underway, and that competition is just fueling the speed and the innovation. Jeff, you made an observation that people are being affected differentially, that everyone in the public sector is not being treated equally, that the AI or the Elon Musk approach is hitting some differentiating than others. You want to elaborate at all on that?
Well, most of the survey information that I've seen in the last few weeks relates probably more so to the private sector than public sector. But I suspect that the percentages or the proportions would be similar. And that basically what that conveyed to me is that leadership, more senior people are using AI and have higher expectations than do the frontline staff, the individual contributors who are being expected to use it. And of those individual contributors, or in fact, even the leaders who are using it, those that are using it are frustrated by their organization's adoption. And the ones that are most savvy are the ones that are disproportionately looking for other work. And one of the comments I made in the article was that, I mean, and this is, I'm drawing on my experience in HR, and I've been involved in organizational efforts to provide employees with an opportunity to self-select for departure. And the problem with that, you can get results. You can provide an incentive, as DOGE did, to pay people until September and let them go their merry way. And you can get a big number. I think it's in the tens of thousands of people that took the government up on that offer. But the problem that I encountered in the past, and I suspect the problem that they will encounter or are encountering, is that the wrong people don't go.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or the right people that have options, that are savvy, that have opportunities on the market, they're going to leave. And then your organization will be weakened as a result. And if it's senior people that take you up on that offer, well, maybe they were 6 months or a year away from retirement and they took the opportunity. And then what you have is the knowledge management, and you have that organizational history walking out the door. And you're also weakening your organization from that perspective. So to me, that's I think it's a bad bet. From my experience, and if leadership is strong and if organizations are making decisions the way they should be deciding who should stay and who should go. It shouldn't be left to, and what I've read in relation to the Atlantic article was that they're planning on using AI to select the people to go, which I think is also dangerous, because I think these tools are fantastic and powerful and will be and are amazing. I don't think they're quite ready for the responsibility that we're putting on them yet. And as Mel said, if we are handing off our responsibility to the algorithm or algorithms without a sufficient amount of human oversight, then I think that's opening ourselves up to some perhaps dangerous consequences. So,
Well, the analogy of Ozempic comes in here. Letting staff go, as an accountant might do, simply based on numbers, would clearly be offensive to Dawn, who has talked about culture, processes. what is core to an organization is not a bunch of tasks, but the sum total of that, and that is the whole is more than the sum of its parts. And you may actually break down an organization's capability of rendering a service, even though you've left in place a number of tasks, you haven't left in place that core culture that keeps it renewing, keeps it learning, keeps it adapting and adjusting. You may have simply dealt with an assembly line, but haven't really dealt with what the purpose of that particular part of the organization happens to be. Peter, you've got your hand up, and then I'm going to ask Dawn if she wants to jump in there.
I just wanted to add to Jeff's comments. I think it was Jeff's that this I call it doggy, just to make it to sound different. This doggy effort down south, it's actually decapitating the next generation of employees, and so this is a really serious issue. And the way they're going about it, I mean, simply just stripping off a whole generation of new employees is a way to actually really weaken the system. And so I think that's something that we don't see yet in Canada because I think decapitating is not the way to go in the sense of just random decapitating like that we're seeing south of the border.
In all respect, though, Peter, I mean, what's different here is the volume. We've seen this done in large corporations. I've seen it done with the Alberta government many years ago, where people are given the option to leave and they're given a good severance, or in fact they're cut because someone came along and said that the last guy I interviewed said your job is redundant. What do you think? And all of a sudden people are gone. So it's not unusual for the public sector to have to spend a few years getting things right again when the next regime arrives. But I just think we're dealing with here is something on such a massive scale where hundreds of thousands are being let go. And mind you, the view is that these jobs, a lot of them weren't even occupied by people.
Nonsense.
Anyway, Mel, you want to go in here, jump in here?
First, I think Jeff had a reaction to what was just said there. You put your finger up.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Peter had mentioned that the other half of that effort was relating to the probationary employees that were let go. And my concern about that was that's your newer incoming employees, the ones that are tech savvy, the ones that are innovative, that want to be, managed differently, that those are the people you want in your organizations. They're fresh out of school. They're enthusiastic. They don't know, what to do that's wrong yet. So they're not as jaded. And that's a big swatch that were also let go. Now, as I understand it, the courts decided that a lot of those folks had to come back. And that's also a side effect of some of the aggressive moves that have been made so far. But I was not crazy about just a carte blanche, cutting of probationary employees either. So anyways, that was all I wanted to add.
Okay, but coming back to the ready, fire, aim rationale, as long as adjustments are being made, there are going to be errors, and some of them may be massive. But whether Elon has the empathy, and it isn't even empathy, it would say, I made a mistake, I will adjust and we will accommodate, or we have enough time to adjust. So that's the argument that presumably would be paid is this is serious, we're going to make some mistakes and we will fix them as we go. I remember Elon being asked very early in the election campaign, in Trump's campaign. No, it was Vance. Vance said, when they talked about layoffs, how are you going to do this? And he said, one at a time, and we will adjust as we go. I think that's the game plan they're playing. Peter? Yeah.
I just wanted to add that we've been through the public sector and also private sector, but certainly the public sector before. I can remember when I first moved to Ottawa, I heard this when I was probably in high school, that there was about the ratio of male to female was about 4-1. In other words, there were more women in Ottawa than there were men by a very large shot. And most of them were young women because they worked in the federal government as secretaries, stenographers, and folks like that. And then that got replaced by, the word processor. But the word processor was in a pool. So we had typing pools and then we had word processing pools. And then the jobs just simply vanished in a rather quick way when suddenly everybody was empowered to have their own desktop computer. And that changed management. And with certain resistance at the highest level, never wanted to use a typewriter or a keyboard before. So, I mean, there was a transition there as well. But it was a significant delayering of employees who served as note takers and recorders of what was happening in meetings. So that's happened before, and it was a very large shift.
Peter, your observation reminds me of something I wanted to say years ago when the computer was arriving, and I was intrigued by the emergence of technology and the role it was having on administration. And I noted that I had found a source that could take minutes, could do supply purchases, that could filter people who I was to interview or who I was to meet, memorize birth dates, etc. And someone asked me, where do I get one of these? And I said, that was a secretary.
Yes.
But they're gone because we all have those skills now ourselves with our cell phones, all of which perform most of the tasks that were once relegated to a secretary. Mel?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that at noon today, I attended about an hour-long presentation by the Globe and Mail, and it was called "Finding the ROI in AI." I was about 15 minutes late and stuff, but there were 3 takeaways that I made notes of here. One of them is they said that 41% of Canadian companies reported using AI and found it to be beneficial. 31% of Canadians don't trust AI.
Mhm.
Then, as far as problems, they said there were 6 different problems. With costs, the question that came up there was, how can we justify something that we don't really understand? What about the lack of talent? What happens if it breaks? Who do we go to? Number 3, a good use case. What are we going to use this stuff for? Funding. How are we going to keep it alive in the organization? Number 5 was platform. Which one do we pick and why? And the last one, the ROI, the subject of the talk itself. Will it be better? Is it worth doing? So it's kind of an interesting perspective from, unfortunately, I didn't get the name of the people, but they are going to send out a recording. So I'll get back.
I would be intrigued to hear how ChatGPT would answer each of those questions, because it would give you a positive response saying, no need to worry, there are answers here to every one of those questions. You've simply got the good prompts to feed to ChatGPT. I can see Jeff smiling. Go ahead, Peter.
Yes, I attended the same video meeting with Globe and Mail. And yes, I found it to be interesting, but I think they missed a lot of the real issues about that transition. But I won't go into it here because this is just a general chat. But yes, I did think that there was some interesting points made, and I think, summarized the key ones. But it's still an issue of delayering going on, and how do we do that properly and efficiently and effectively? Big issues.
No, that's the essence of the question. It's going to take place. And how do we do it effectively and efficiently? And even more important, how do we make sure that errors that do occur are corrected quickly, not just out of empathy, but logically? Katrina.
Hey everyone, very interesting discussion. I just want to weigh in on this whole thing about trust. And a lot of times we frame trust as, should we trust the AI system? But I think increasingly, one of the questions we should be asking is, do we trust who makes the AI system? And when it comes to the countries who traditionally have not been our allies or who we're at odds with, such as China, it's very easy to kind of ask those questions. But increasingly, I think we need to ask that about big American tech. And when we think about all of these systems, what are we talking about? Big American tech. And so especially when it comes to the public sector, especially at a moment where our sovereignty is under threat, I think we really need to be asking ourselves, who's making these systems? Is it in our best interest? And then how do we maybe make systems that are in our best interest, i.e., whether that's Canadian made or partnering with actual allies that we can trust? So I wanted to kind of just throw that into the conversation as another angle.
Well, you're setting up next week, because next week will be a revisiting of sovereignty, but I'm going to do a referendum check right now. Katrina, who do you trust? Which nation do you trust in terms of the evolution of AI?
I don't know if I want to go on the record and state that because I know we're being recorded, but I think increasingly it's an important question to ask. From a guardrail standpoint, I think Europe's doing some really interesting things. They're one of the first places to kind of move on regulations and laws with EU AI Act. So I think that's really positive. I think we can look to them for some examples.
Mhm. I mean, I don't ask the question to embarrass you because it does require an answer, because people are making purchases today. And you've posed a question that is reflective of critical thinking. We're just not drifting through the future, we're making decisions as we go. And AI is making a lot of promises and being employed on virtually everything. I mean, I can't, this week I was asking it to help me put plots together for a garden. It was having difficulty doing the mapping, but it's been an aid. I picked up gardening over the course of the last 6 months, and it has guided me all the way through until I got to layouts. It was having a heck of a time with the math. But yeah, it's we're in it. I hope our kids coming out of high school and coming out of grade school are learning about how to do proper prompting, how to do proper critical thinking. I don't think they are. I think they are being taught to fear something, as opposed to thinking of this as an aid or as an alternative. I think they're going to have to learn to work with it. I think they're doing it with Alexa in the kitchen. That's a beginning. But by the way, coming back, Jeff, to a point you made in your article, employees do seem to be embracing AI. They're using it themselves, 80, 89, 90%, saying they're using it and they're finding it more efficient. They believe that AI could set better, more relevant goals for them. So
Yeah,
even though there may be some angst, as Katrina recently raised, about the biases that may be inherent and the value systems of one region or one nation versus another, one way or another, we're moving forward. Whether it be with DeepSync or with ChatGPT or with Bing, we're moving ahead.
yeah. I think one of the points that the survey from BetterWorks made was that the more employees use AI, the more they fear its ability to replace them. And many more employees are using AI in their jobs than they are informing their boss about that use, because they don't want their immediate manager to devalue the work that they're producing. So they're using it without being upfront about it. And in many cases, what I also learned was that employees are using their own preferred AI tools rather than those of the organization that they work for, which also has dangers, because it might not be a secure platform. You might be, providing intellectual property to this tool that's then used for a training purpose, and then, at some future prompt, someone asks a question and some confidential data pops up because it's been ingested by the model that was being used. So there are dangers inherent in that too. And one of the things that we haven't touched on yet, but I think it's important just as a comment, is that, and because of, when Peter and others have talked about the introduction of computers into the workplace, the fundamental difference between those computers and the desktop computers that we still have and use, whether it's Excel or Word or whatever, is these are all deterministic systems. And AI tools are probabilistic tools. So they're not giving you the one answer. They are calculating by probabilities and a vast corpus of information what a possible answer is. That doesn't mean it's the right answer. And so you have to understand that at a deep level in order to properly understand and contextualize the answer that you get. You ask the same question, the same prompt repeatedly, and you can get different answers. And so I'm not saying that those answers aren't useful, that the tools aren't powerful. It's just different. And I don't think we have our heads wrapped around the implications of that either in the use of these tools. And when we talk about AI, we're primarily still talking about large language models. And I've argued this for 2 years. I think it's misnamed. I don't think that we should have called it augmented intelligence, because that would have put the onus on us we're the ones whose intelligence is being augmented with these tools. And that means we have to be careful about how we use them. When you say it's artificial intelligence, it imbues to them a greater intelligence than they actually possess. They're still token prediction machines. Powerful, incredible, but they're still predicting tokens based on the prompt and what was just, yeah, almost intelligent. Mel just typed in almost intelligent. That's probably better than artificial intelligence. Anyways, that's just a side comment.
You make the point of the relevance of prompts. I think employees need to know how to do proper prompting. I think the building of scenarios so that you've got options, so that in order is a form of critical thinking in the usage of learning language models or generative AI. What you learn as you continue to use these, depending upon the task that you perform most frequently or the new task that you're trying to, is to use it for searching. Don't use it for necessarily for a final answer. When I am doing background research, and Jeff, this was a perfect example, this topic and the one next week. I take some ideas and I begin to formulate those ideas, and then ChatGPT helps me organize them and maybe look even deeper or give me scenarios. And it enriches the way I look at a topic before I finalize how I want to approach it. And sometimes I get very confused, and it can help me sort out and find the essence of what might be 15 different or 5 different ideas that I'm wrestling with, and I can't find the common element in them that I want to use for a headline. It's superb. I'm going to call on you, Dawn. You've been very quiet today.
Well, I'm just listening to all this wonderful input from everybody else. I've been reflecting on the cultural impact of AI. And I think too, going back to last week's conversation, when I always think about satisfaction, citizen satisfaction, if government is using AI, and if you're wanting to make sure the services that you're getting from government are reliable, that government is responsive, that you're being assured that you're getting the right information or service, they have empathy for you, and you're getting the tangibles, the things that were promised. And those 5 things are the things that will determine the level of satisfaction. And that works across industry sectors. So even patients in the healthcare system. So all the more reason that the work processes that government is using are in good shape, and they're working consistently well before you dare introduce any automation, right? And the other thing I was thinking about too was, the reference to China and things like a social credit score, and how when AI is used in a way to monitor and control people, how people don't like that. Human beings don't like that, and there is quite a cultural impact. You've got this whole very thing happening in China right now. It's called laying flat, and that's the younger people just don't want to engage or do much of anything. They're not motivated. And if we get involved in doing too much of that, I fear what our population might look like years from now. I mean, I just was listening to something today. It was an announcement about, given our current fiscal or financial situation here in Canada, how they're going to take more tax off, from seniors, as if the proposed capital gains wasn't enough for entrepreneurs. I don't think they've quite gotten away with that yet, but they're going after Canada Pension Plan and old age security. And of course, they're really worried about safety and fraud. And so they're going to have to work very closely with the banks to do some extra monitoring. And this, to me, conjures up certainly thoughts about social credit scores and so forth, and the fact that people don't like to be monitored, and just what a tact. I was also thinking about going after the seniors in our population, the baby boomers and seniors that have worked so hard and accumulated something for their retirement, or maybe on a fixed income type of retirement, that's not a great group to hit with stuff like this. And I just think that in terms, it's really going to impact the population, the way they think about their country, and the level of satisfaction that exists with what government is doing. So I think that they really need to think about what they do in the short term and the long-term consequences of it.
Well, clearly, the emergence of AI is not in keeping with humanism. And I would argue, though, a point I think you made, that those five values that you cited for judging whether a service is satisfactory or not.
Yeah.
I think you said you wouldn't want to automate until you had all five right. I think the reason you do want to automate is because you're not getting the five right. And that's the argument that they're making with it.
The thing about work processes, or the documenting the way you work, is that you want to be consistent and you want to operate at the desired level of service, right? And you always want to strive to get better and better. The time not to automate is when you've got that variability, and things
Yeah.
things could be going well or not, and to automate that just creates chaos.
Although-
So my question would be for government: are you got your ducks in a row? Have you got your work processes in good shape? There's a lot of government departments that you walked into, they haven't even documented the way they work.
Well, and in that regard, maybe it's about time those governments, because we have been attempting to increase the efficiency, effectiveness, and economy of government ever since I can remember.
Right.
Why is it so hard, or is there a reluctance? And I'll give you an example. Wait times.
Yeah.
Just fix wait times.
Oh yeah.
That would be a beginning. Everybody would notice. But
Right.
when you have to wait hours, and private sector is not a lot better. I don't understand why why CRTC doesn't fix the wait times for the telecommunications industry, or hospitals, or wait times in emergency wards. If you would fix the wait times, you would have some sense that there's empathy, that they're counting properly, that they're responsible to the people as opposed to supply. Just give me somebody that cares about wait times and I'd be happy. And AI cares about wait times. Peter?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to make 3 points. First, one was related to Don's comments, and I totally agree with you, Don, about this development of loneliness is the word I would use. And more young people and older people seem to be bifurcating into locking themselves into their own rooms and, having their relationship with their avatar as opposed to with a person. And China is an excellent example of that right now on a grand scale, especially among the young men.
Well, Japan too.
Well, yes, Japan. Well, in fact, South Korea is going to be in a real disaster in a few 2 decades or so because of the replacement issue, but that's another story. My second point was in regard to what Perry was talking about, the name artificial intelligence, and somebody else had mentioned maybe it should be called something else. But just to put it in context, the guy who came up with the name artificial intelligence was in the earliest days of computing in the 1950s, 1955, in fact. And so in those days, they were trying to, and you may even remember people like von Neumann was moving from trying to design hydrogen bombs to trying to understand the origins of life and what made life and so on. So biology was a big thing. He became a very seriously interested in biology. So the point is, we were then getting into the idea of how does the mind work? And so artificial intelligence was to using computers to try and simulate how the mind worked at that time. And we had very simple computing in those days. It's like we still measure the power of our cars in horsepower. So, we're stuck with terminology. I don't think it's a big issue about the naming as long as you understand what it means. And my third point was basically tying two things together here. Ellie Fahy and I had an op-ed published last week in Research Money. If you haven't seen it, it's called "The AI Gold Rush is On." but where is the gold? The basic point is we're finding all these nuggets, panning for gold, and some of them are little, and that's like let's call it an AI agent, and others are bigger, and we'll call those like a large language model. But nobody's found the seam yet or the veins. So all they know is it's upstream because they're finding gold downstream. And if you look at the amount of money that's been poured into training versus the amount of money that's come out of revenue, there's a huge gap. The revenue is definitely lower than the training costs.
Yeah.
So that was why the gold rush. Where is the gold? And the second op-ed, and this is one I only put this out as a suggested topic because it's one Ellie and I are just debating tomorrow. But I have a title for the next op-ed, and it's basically AI may become a new social disease. And what I mean by that is in the sense that we've become so dependent, for example, on our smartphones and the various silos that people are falling into. And with AI becoming a way of manipulating the human mind in a way that is never seen in any tool before. We had mass media, but that's not manipulating individual human minds in the same way that an AI tool can do so. So I think that is a serious issue. And that also comes back to the, ready, fire, aim approach. Because if you're developing and releasing these kinds of tools that can affect the way a human mind operates and thinks, then you shouldn't be just issuing it out and doing it in a aim, ready, fire, aim approach, which is the way Silicon Valley works today.
Well,
They should be testing it more. That's the bottom line.
Isn't that what we are seeing today with Facebook, with Instagram, with TikTok, with our youth? Is they have been raised on these social media tools that have shaped the way they think and has shaped their social behavior.
Yes, I agree. It could get much worse in
Well,
the sense of shaping one's behavior.
I think that's your point. I mean, this is not the beginning. We are well into this now, and we have seen some of the consequences of Facebook on youth, on sexting and whatever it's called. There are a lot of odd behaviors that young kids are behaving that imply that they don't have the same social maturity, same EQ.
Or even social skills at all. Because they're
Okay,
like isolating themselves, like Don was
well,
talking.
you get into this loneliness and people bailing out and saying, I just can't keep up. We're into the rate of change issue again. And I will, in a wrap up, talk about where we may well be and what we may well be forming as the future of public service. It may well be ready to be transferred out. Katrina.
Yeah, I wanted to take seriously your point about this idea of wait times. And I also want to draw on Trudy's comment in the chat about Canada Revenue Agency. Totally feel you, Trudy. I really hate when I have to call them. So there's kind of this assumption always that tech just makes things better, faster, efficient, because that's kind of what it aims to do. But I wonder about like what is actually causing these wait times. So there's kind of this interesting dichotomy. We want smaller government. We don't want to pay so much money. So we don't want to hire more people to address the wait time, right? Because that's expensive. Presumably, if you hire more people, you could do more things and answer more calls and that sort of thing. So I think then there's this sort of sense, okay, we'll turn to tech to see if it can solve it. But I wonder if there's been any like rigorous analysis on like, what is it exactly? It's going to be different probably for different government departments that is driving the wait time. And will technology actually address it? Because I sometimes feel it's the process of government, like decision-making bottlenecks that happens. You can throw a lot of things at a bottleneck, and if you don't address what the bottleneck is, it doesn't matter how much tech you have. If your decision-making process is such that you have someone who's in charge of that and there's bottleneck, then you're not necessarily going to get any faster. And so I guess I think it'd be a very interesting exercise to actually do that and then figure out where to apply the, whether it's AI or other digital tool sets to, I don't know, enable more self-serve, perhaps. I think that's the whole idea behind chatbots. Whether it can actually happen or not, we'll see. But I guess I just challenge this idea of we'll just throw tech at it and hope for the best, as opposed to a more logical and rigorous approach to it.
Yeah, I'll come back to that in a moment because I did do research on wait times in consulting with the telecommunications and hospitality companies. So I'll give you some feedback that might be of interest. Dawn, you want to address this point or make another?
Yeah, I did. I did want to address it. Most of the work that we've done in government, and when we go in and we teach people about how to document their work processes and how to improve them, it's significant improvement that takes place. And we're also building a culture there where people are always looking at their work and asking, well, what are we doing now and how can we do it better? And leadership is encouraged to be looking for ideas and suggestions from the people who are doing the work, and encouraging their employees to be innovative and to take educated risks. And so this shift kind of takes place, really, it's a cultural shift and this kind of improvement mindset. And it's absolutely amazing what can happen and does happen. And yet, when we work with some government departments, this is something that goes on in government. We don't see it in the private or the nonprofit sector. Something goes on in government where a particular, let's say, a ministry starts performing very, very well. They'll get flack from other ministries about, hey, don't make us look bad.
Yeah.
You know, and so those are important things to consider here. And in terms of wait times, I mean, I've worked with people in healthcare and so forth, and a lot of different government ministries on improving their work processes. And each and every time, it's absolutely amazing the difference that it makes. I think you can get rid of those wait times without a problem, and with a little bit of work, if leadership has the will to do it.
Okay, I'll jump in here and then I'll let Bill have the final word. The research that we did with Tim Hortons and with healthcare was quite illuminating. Tim Hortons likes wait times. It illustrates they have value and that the market really is prepared to wait for something of value. So some corporations intentionally will play the wait time game. I can recall as a consultant being told, hold back on submitting that report to the client. You're too fast. They're not going to they're not going to see that as valuable. You've got to make it look like it took a long while to get it done because it was so hard. So people can play the value game with wait lists. Secondly, when I was director of privatization, I said to the government, watch your wait times, because that is going to upset the public enough that ultimately you can privatize the services because they're going to get so fed up with public service wait times. So you might want to manipulate the wait times so that the customer becomes dissatisfied as a public sector in order that they start considering other alternatives. That's called manipulation, and politicians are not beyond manipulating. Bill, you're up.
Yeah, you make great points there. I think it's motivation. Businesses are motivated by profits, so improving their customer experience in many cases will improve their profits. Government's customer is not the citizen. It's the parliament and up the chain. They don't, since they don't get value, if a bureaucrat does a better job than the bureaucrat beside them, they don't get a bonus, they don't get a pay raise. And if the government saves money in a ministry, they don't, the workers themselves see no benefit in doing that. So their motivations are completely different. And their motivations tend to be, I don't want to have a problem. So that's why paper gets passed, move it up the chain. I don't want to deal with it. And I think one of the speakers, I think it was Dawn, said it very appropriately, or I'm sorry, maybe someone else, Katrina said it, is that there is a bottleneck, and that's the decision maker. And you could put as many frontline people on the phone lines, but it comes down to a couple of desks to make the decision. And that's where the bottleneck is. And those people do not want to make a decision that's controversial. So they take their time, and really that's the roadblock for any government efficiencies or the reason for its inefficiencies. So thank you, Perry. Your final words.
Well, we're in the wrap up. I mean, the discussion today about AI retooling public services, I think we've made the observation that it's coming, and we hope that critical thinking will be employed, and that if ready, fire, aim is the model, then let's accept that government plays a role in regulating the error rates so that we make the accommodation, the adjustment as we go. But the byproduct of all this will be either it's going to work or it's not going to work. And if it works, if the promises of AI are to be realized and the way of implementing these changes are correct, we will be living in a very different world, a world where the welfare state was basically an opportunity for employment, massive employment. 50% of the jobs in Canada are public sector jobs. What will those workers do in the future if, in fact, those jobs are not available in the public sector? Are they going to be more creative? Are they going to find ways to be more productive? Are they going to be more entrepreneurial? Will we find that the nation actually benefits by having a small public service sector, and that people find more meaningful opportunities than working in rote job described workplaces? I don't know, but we are riding this tsunami together. We are observing it, and in various dimensions, from whether it's the new Ozemka, whether or not it's an alternative to management consultants, whether or not we will have a meaningful role in the future.